This is going to be another one of those mornings where my thoughts are kind of a grab bag, and I do not know that they're converging on anything. What struck me this morning, really not even an hour ago, when I was on my walk into work, because I commute to work every day on foot, I got to thinking about the difference between growing up in a world where you cultivated the field and you planted your crops, and sometimes they came up, and sometimes there was a bumper crop, and sometimes there was kind of a puny crop, and sometimes there was a disease that got into it, or there were animals that ate your crops. You didn't always know what was going to happen. The weather was a variable, and you lived in a world with a lot of uncertainty. And we deal with this academically, the idea of an external locus of control. And still, I was doing some work for a lecture I'm going to give sometime soon about, it's in the field of intercultural communication, and it's about how the cultures of Central and South America, there's still a big dose of the world is driven by big and powerful forces that we are not in control of. And our job in the world is to endure those forces. It's to manage to work around those forces, not to try to harness them. But people in the United States today, even in impoverished communities, even in communities that feel economically threatened and socially dislocated, the ones that are Trump's base, even in those communities, the world is a very controllable world, and there's a lot that's push button. And there are a lot of apps. And an app might develop a bug, but then you can judge the app as in need of improvement, and you can expect that there'll be a patch and an update soon. There's this progress toward ever-increasing control, whereas our ancestors lived in a world where there wasn't as much control. And I just got a little mentally tickled about what does that do to your expectations when every cue in your environment tells you that if something does not suit what you want, then you just adjust the controls until it is. But you can't take the economy, and you can't take social institutions, and you can't take race relations or gender relations. You can't take how news is reported. You can't take how the government responds to your concerns. You try and you try and you try to adjust the controls on that, and it seems as though the controls don't do anything, like the closed door button on the elevator, or like one of those thermostats in large government buildings that are put there for show. And after you try to adjust the controls, and I could even say this is a metaphor for elections. This is your attempt to put your own little bit of influence into adjusting the controls. If it happens too many times, well, what people do is they delete the app. Or if their device doesn't do what it's supposed to do, you can be like me. I was very bad about this when I was a kid. You take it and you slam it down in disgust, because the frustration builds to the point where one day you just do not have the impulse control to suppress the frustration. So that was all on my mind on my walk in this morning. The other thing was something that I knew about before last night, but I got curious, and I will shamefully admit I started with a Wikipedia entry, but then I read a couple of other online published accounts of this, and that was the ghost dance. And the ghost dance was a movement that swept through Indian populations in the 1890s. It had its roots in some earlier ceremonies, but there was a man whose Indian name was Wovoka, and his white name was Jack Wilson. And I believe he was a Paiute, because I believe that the ghost dance began among the Paiutes, although it later spread to the Lakota as well. And what Jack Wilson, what Wovoka, I should call him Wovoka, what he preached to his people was that he had had a vision. And in the vision, if the people would do this dance, and it was a circle dance to a chant, if they would do it faithfully, and what he wanted them to do is he wanted them to do it for 5 days, and on the morning of the 5th day, everybody go wash in the river and then go home, and then repeat that every 6 weeks. In the vision, what the spirits in the spirit world were going to do was they were going to send new soil to cover the land, and it was also going to cover up all the whites. And all of his people, all the Paiutes, would be lifted up into the air and held, suspended in the air until all the new soil was laid down and then returned to the land. But this would only happen if they all faithfully danced the ghost dance. And this spread to the Lakota, and there were some reports from among the Bureau of Indian Affairs officials from the United States federal government that the Lakota ghost dance evangelists, for want of a better word, that they were making what they called ghost shirts. And the ghost shirts, they said, would stop bullets. And they were doing ghost dance steps to try to rally their people. And it was an encounter with some of the Lakota, including at least one ghost dance emissary, that led to the massacre at Wounded Knee. So I thought about all of that, and I thought in some ways the election of 2016 was almost people ghost dancing. It was people who felt that they were tied to the land, but that they were losing everything. Everything was slipping away as an alien race moved in. So they found a charismatic leader, and they found rituals that were irrational, saying things like, "Trump won, snowflake, get over it," following a man who would tell them that 2 + 2 was 5 and any other answer was fake news, and going back repeatedly to be reassured by that, and elevating loyalty in the relationship above what their critical faculties should have told them was the plain, indisputable truth. In some ways, you could understand that as mental ghost dancing. And when I think of it that way, it does become a little bit easier to feel compassion, to feel a little bit less disdain, to understand being that close to despair, when you can see the comparison between Trump's bloc and where the Paiutes and the Lakota were in 1890, and understand that these are some of the dislocations and the abrasions as social institutions update themselves, sometimes brutally. And that's very, very sanitized language when I talk about what Europeans invading North America did, and I call that social institutions updating themselves. But the word brutal is important, because I do believe it's important to do right things and not wrong things, and I do believe that most of what European explorers did when they reached North America was absolutely indefensible and unacceptable, and that the repercussions and the ripples from those decisions continue to this day, and we still treat people living on reservations, the descendants of the first peoples, we still treat them shamefully. I think all those things are true. I also think that predators chasing down prey cause them a lot of fear and a lot of pain, and I am against fear and pain. But as Jesus said, you're always going to have the poor with you, and when you're so idealistic that you're paralyzed, and when you're so idealistic that you make a demand for instant justice, when it's not timed to where effectiveness is even an option. I mean, I hate to turn loose of my idealism, because I think the Bible is a very idealistic set of teachings. I don't know where that thought is headed. But I do know it helps me look at this less as they're on one side, I'm on the other, they're my adversary, and it helps me turn loose a little bit my grip on my angry thoughts, my hostile thoughts. And that's one of the biggest reasons that I do this in the first place. A couple of leftover thoughts that I jotted down during the week, and as a matter of fact, I jotted them down the same day that I recorded last week's episode. The whole thing about immigration, the whole thing about the Trump voting bloc and their fascination with immigration is that they will very commonly say being an illegal immigrant means you have done something that's against the law, and we want you to observe the law. You are in the country unlawfully. And that's nonsense. That's not what it's about. That's just facially false. That is not what it's about. You can be found guilty of violating the law anytime any law enforcement official wants to bring you up on a charge. There are so many laws that are so vaguely written, that have so many requirements that people routinely, unknowingly violate, that it's purely a matter of a law enforcement official's discretion that they don't walk down the street arresting everybody they see. But what I've just said is the classic example of a message that does not work. We are not living in a law-abiding community. The notion that if we remove certain people from our midst, we will be restored to a law-abiding community, that's just false. There's no way that's true, which means we are making a judgment call that certain infractions are worse than other infractions, and that's not irrational. I mean, murder is worse than parking tickets. But the infractions that you're guilty of and I'm guilty of, if we want to say that those are worse than being in the country not having arrived through a legal process, then we have to have that discussion. We can't just say that it's the difference between legal and illegal, which is what, when they feel compelled to give an account for their beliefs, a lot of Trump voters will say that it's just a matter of, I don't believe in people getting by illegally. But even if that's true, it will be deflected. You can't trap people by painting them into a logical corner when they are burned out on the public deliberation in a community, when they've lost faith in the community and they do not see the members of that community as deliberative partners. It's a return to universalism versus particularism. If you're going to believe in the law, you have to believe that the law applies equally to everybody. If you have an extensive legal system and you place a lot of your faith and you trust the legal system for a lot of your security, but you don't believe that the law applies to everybody, then what you believe in is corruption. But where we are, one of the pathologies of our community is that we have a lot of people who will speak very loudly about the importance of being law-abiding, but they do not want the law applied uniformly. And that means that law is a weapon. But wherever law is a weapon, it loses its authority. And when people reason that through, there's a lot of danger that lies down that road. And what you've got to do, what we've got to do, what I wish I could figure out how to help this community do, is for everybody to reach the consensus, okay, we will give up a lot of things we would ordinarily do in self-defense because we'll trust that the whole web of laws and law enforcement will keep us safe to the best of its bureaucratic limited ability. But we're not there currently. There's still too much manipulation of, I will use this as a scourge against the people I see as my opponents. The other thing I got to, and this was in listening to the daily updates on the latest attempt to repeal Obamacare, I got the notion that bills that are proposed and before Congress, or probably other legislative bodies as well, they're kitchen appliances. There's a tiny, tiny handful of proposed bills that truly are game changers, that really do address a problem and in discernible, defensible ways make people's lives better. The rest, and this is far and away the majority, are a lot of hype and have no purpose. They are appealing enough to part you from your money, but they don't actually change anything in the environment where they operate. So what was remarkable to me this week was that, and I know I've said this before, but I'll say it one last time because I think maybe this issue has become dormant for a while. The Republican Party controls both houses of Congress and the White House, but they can't manage to repeal Obamacare. I'm just baffled by that. It would be as though the Nazis had won World War II, conquered every other nation on earth, and then suddenly lacked the will to carry out the final solution. Now, I would regard that as a good outcome, and I regard this as a good outcome. But what's happened is the Republicans were not able to pass the bill because they had not positioned themselves where they could invent a kitchen appliance that actually improved what went on in the kitchen. Because when it's all about the messaging, and it's not about the proposal that the messaging is meant to promote, then you wind up with a kitchen appliance that's nothing but hype.